Before the first monuments were raised, before the first written words were carved into stone, and long before the concept of a nation ever crossed a human mind, there was a journey so vast and so courageous that it remains the greatest migration in the history of our species. We often speak of the explorers who crossed the oceans in wooden ships, but we must first look back to the true pioneers who conquered a frozen world with nothing but their own 2 feet and an unbreakable will to survive. Imagine a world locked in the grip of a massive ice age, where the very map of the Earth looked nothing like the one we recognize today, and where the survival of a family depended on the ability to navigate a landscape that was as beautiful as it was deadly. This is not just a story of movement, it is a story of the ultimate human triumph over the elements, a testament to the fact that the spirit of exploration has been woven into the DNA of this land for over 15,000 years. The setting for this epic saga is a lost world known as Beringia, a massive land bridge that once connected the eastern edge of Siberia to the western wilds of Alaska. During the peak of the last glacial maximum, so much of the Earth's water was trapped within colossal ice sheets that the sea levels plummeted by more than 300 feet, exposing a vast, grassy plain that stretched for hundreds of miles. This was not merely a narrow path to be crossed quickly, but a rich and vibrant ecosystem, a sprawling frontier that served as a sanctuary for life amidst the surrounding glaciers. It was a place where the air was crisp and the horizons were endless, offering a bridge between 2 worlds that would eventually become the foundation for everything we know as the Americas. These ancient travelers were not discovering a new world in the way we might think of a modern expedition. They were living life in its purest form, following the rhythms of nature and the migration of the great beasts that shared their world. These small groups of hunter-gatherers were masters of their environment, possessing a deep and intimate knowledge of the land, the stars, and the seasons. They followed the tracks of the woolly mammoth, the ancient bison, and the caribou, moving steadily across the tundra because their lives were inextricably linked to the animals they hunted. They were not wandering aimlessly, they were driven by a profound sense of purpose and a mastery of survival that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would be unthinkable to the modern person. As these families pushed eastward, they encountered a landscape dominated by the sheer scale of nature's power, where glaciers thousands of feet thick towered over the horizon like frozen mountains. Yet, within this icy fortress, they found corridors of life, valleys and coastal routes that offered a way forward into the unknown. One might wonder what it felt like to be the very first person to crest a ridge and look out over a valley that had never before seen a human footprint. The sheer audacity required to continue moving into the unknown, leaving behind everything familiar for the promise of what lay beyond the next ridge, is a quality that defines the very essence of the human story on this continent. While many history books suggest this migration happened exactly 15,000 years ago, the deeper we dig into the earth, the more we find evidence that suggests an even more ancient and mysterious timeline. Recent archaeological finds in remote caves and along ancient riverbeds have unearthed stone tools and charcoal remains that hint at a human presence reaching back 20,000, or perhaps even 30,000 years. This revelation changes everything, suggesting that these early Americans were even more resilient and adaptable than we ever imagined, navigating the continent during the harshest periods of the Ice Age. It reminds us that there are still secrets buried beneath the soil, waiting to reach out and tell us a story of endurance that exceeds our wildest expectations. The technology of these first Americans was a marvel of efficiency and craftsmanship, centered around the creation of the famous Clovis point and other sophisticated stone tools. These were not primitive rocks, but carefully engineered instruments of survival, flaked from flint and obsidian with a precision that rivals modern craftsmanship. A single spearhead represented hours of labor and a lifetime of inherited wisdom, designed to take down megafauna that stood twice the height of a man. The sheer bravery required to stand before a charging woolly mammoth with nothing but a handcrafted spear is a level of courage that is almost impossible to fathom, yet it was the daily reality for these ancestors who paved the way for all who followed. As the centuries passed and the climate began a slow, inevitable shift, the great ice sheet started to retreat, and the world began to transform in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. The melting ice poured into the oceans, and the Bering Land Bridge, the very path that had brought them here, began to disappear beneath the rising waves of the Pacific. In a relatively short period of time, the bridge was gone, and the inhabitants of the Americas were separated from the rest of the world by thousands of miles of water. This was the moment the continent became a world unto itself, a vast laboratory of human culture and adaptation that would remain isolated and unique for thousands of years. With the path behind them closed forever, these early settlers began to spread across the continent with a speed that continues to baffle modern scientists. From the frozen reaches of the Yukon to the sun-drenched plains of the Midwest, and eventually down to the very tip of South America, they moved with an incredible momentum. They were not just surviving, they were claiming a continent, adapting their clothing, their shelters, and their hunting strategies to every conceivable environment. They learned the secrets of the forests, the deserts, and the mountains, creating a tapestry of life that was as diverse as the landscape itself. The mystery of their journey is further deepened by the debate over which route they actually took to move south. For a long time, it was believed they followed a single, ice-free corridor through the center of the continent, but many researchers now point to the Kelp Highway, a coastal route along the Pacific Northwest. This theory suggests that these explorers were also master mariners, using small boats to skirt the edge of the glaciers, living off the bounty of the sea as they moved southward. This adds a whole new dimension to their story, portraying them not just as land-bound hunters, but as versatile explorers of both the earth and the water. Every step they took was a victory of the human spirit over the impossible, and as they moved, they witnessed the extinction of the great Ice Age giants and the birth of a new era. The world they inherited was one of staggering beauty and endless resources, but it required a constant, vigilant effort to master. They built the first hearths, shared the first stories of this land around flickering fires, and laid the foundations for the complex societies that would eventually rise from the soil. The pride we feel when looking at the history of this land begins here, with the people who saw a wild, untamed world and had the strength to call it home. It is important to realize that these early Americans were not a single, monolithic group, but a collection of diverse bands with their own distinct traditions and ways of life. Even in those earliest days, the continent was a place of variety, where different groups developed unique tools and strategies based on the specific challenges of their local geography. This internal diversity was the first spark of the vibrant culture that would characterize the Americas for millennia to come. They were the first to name the rivers, the first to climb the peaks, and the first to understand the soul of the American landscape. As we reflect on the legacy of the Beringia crossing, we must recognize the sheer scale of the environmental changes they navigated. They lived through a time of planetary upheaval, witnessing the landscape literally shift beneath their feet as forests grew where glaciers once stood. Their ability to remain stable and successful during such dramatic shifts is a lesson in resilience that resonates through the ages. It tells us that no matter how much the world changes, the human capacity for adaptation and innovation is our greatest strength, a flame that was ignited in the frozen wastes of the North and has never been extinguished. The transition from a nomadic lifestyle to more settled existences happened over thousands of years, but the seeds were sown during those initial millennia of exploration. As they found areas of abundance, they began to return to the same sites season after season, developing a deep, spiritual connection to specific places. This sense of belonging to the land is a recurring theme in the history of the continent, a feeling that the earth is not just a resource, but a part of who we are. These first inhabitants were the original stewards of the American wilderness, living in a balance with nature that allowed them to flourish for countless generations. What is perhaps most surprising about this period is how much we are still learning through the use of modern technology. Using genetic mapping and advanced carbon dating, scientists are finding that the story of the first Americans is much more complex than the simple bridge narrative suggests. There may have been multiple waves of migration, different groups arriving at different times, and even interactions between cultures that we are only just beginning to understand. This constant state of discovery keeps the history of the original settlement fresh and exciting, proving that the past is not a closed book, but a living, breathing mystery. The impact of these first people on the environment was profound, as they were the first humans to interact with ecosystems that had evolved in total isolation for millions of years. They were a new and powerful force in the natural world, and their arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in the biological history of the planet. While the extinction of the megafauna remains a topic of scientific investigation, there is no doubt that the arrival of humans brought a new level of intelligence and social organization to the American wild, forever changing the trajectory of life on this side of the globe. To look back at the crossing of Beringia is to look into a mirror of our own potential. It shows us that humans are at our best when we are pushing boundaries, when we are curious about what lies over the horizon, and when we work together to protect our families and our future. These people did not have the benefit of maps, or GPS, or modern medicine, yet they achieved something that modern man would find nearly impossible. They crossed a world of ice to find a world of promise, and in doing so, they ensured that the story of humanity would be a global one. The reflections of this ancient period are still visible in the land today, in the ancient trails that became modern roads and in the deep respect for the wilderness that remains a core part of the American identity. We are the inheritors of a legacy of courage that began with a single footstep on a land bridge 15,000 years ago. When we stand on the shores of the Pacific or look out over the vastness of the Great Plains, we are standing on the same ground that provided hope and sustenance to those original pioneers. Their story is our story, a narrative of beginning, of movement, and of the enduring quest for a better life. As we conclude this chapter of our journey through history, we are left with a profound sense of awe for those who came before us. They were the first to see the beauty of this continent, the first to brave its storms, and the first to dream under its vast, open skies. Their journey across the Bering Land Bridge was not just a migration, it was the birth of a new world. By understanding their struggle and their triumph, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ground we walk on today, knowing that it was won through the grit and determination of the world's most incredible explorers. The story of the United States does not begin in 1776, but in the silence of the Ice Age, with a people who dared to walk into